And here we go, letting everybody in.
You reminded me of someone else.
Welcome, everyone. We would ask you to please mute yourselves as you come into the room. You're welcome to turn on your video, and we'll get started in just a moment. If you would please mute yourselves if you're not going to be speaking. All right, Scott, everybody's in from the waiting room. It's all yours.
Okay. You want to start the slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
How's that? Can you see him?
Yeah, that'd be great.
There you go.
So why don't you switch to the next slide? Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Scott Schneider, and I'm on the steering committee for Progressive Neighbors, which is hosting this forum. Progressive Neighbors is a local community organization dedicated to electing more progressive candidates to local office. And you can learn more about our efforts at www.progressiveneighborsmd.org. There are a lot of important issues facing the county now. Fighting the pandemic, of course, vaccine distribution challenges, reopening businesses and schools safely, helping those who are food insecure, reforming policing and criminal justice, and many others. But housing has been at the center of this crisis as well, trying to keep people in their homes, protecting them from eviction, and preventing homelessness. But as we come out of this crisis, it's clear that poor people and people of color are suffering the most, and our county is becoming more inequitable. There are 20,000 people on the waiting list for subsidies for affordable housing. The Trump administration did everything they could to undermine the Fair Housing Act and cut support for renters. Housing is fundamental, and housing policies in the past have caused huge disparities between whites and people of color due to policies like redlining. This has created a huge wealth gap and resulted in more segregation in our schools. Homeless populations have grown. More people are priced out of the market, from seniors on fixed income to young people starting out at their first job. The county and county council and county planning board and state legislature, and now the federal government, are all focused on this issue, and much is being done or proposed. We're still falling behind though, and there's no one silver bullet. Today's forum is intended to provide an overview of where we are and what's being done, as well as a place for discussing the range of solutions being proposed and what could be proposed. Pressures on affordable housing aren't going away, and in fact will likely grow as more people want to move into the county and transit solutions like the Purple Line come online. We hope this forum will be the beginning of a dialogue between county and state officials and residents on how we can move forward with real solutions to make housing a right, not a privilege. And we hope these efforts will help preserve the diversity in our county. Next slide. So this is our agenda, and we're going to have 6 speakers, and I'll introduce each one individually, and then they'll speak, and then at the end we'll take questions. Next slide. So if you have questions, please post them to the chat, and stay on mute until you're called on. And Michael Tardif, who's the producer for this forum from the MCDCC, will monitor the questions in the chat and spotlight people who are asking the questions. So the 3 main questions we're focused on today are: how do we increase the supply of affordable housing, particularly for low-income residents making less than 50% of the mean income? 2, how do we distribute affordable housing throughout the county? And 3rd, how do we preserve existing affordable housing units? Next slide. So I talked about Progressive Neighbors, and this tells you a little bit about them, and you can go to our website to learn more. Next slide. So our first speaker today is going to be Mark Elrich. Mark was a teacher at Rolling Terrace Elementary School in Tacoma Park for 17 years, served as a council member on the Tacoma Park City Council from 1987 to 2006, served 3 terms on the Montgomery County Council as an at-large member before first being elected in 2006. And then he was elected in November 6th, 2018 to be our county executive. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and Michael will start Mark's slides.
Yep. So just to give you some perspective, I've been in, I moved to Tacoma Park around 1980, and I immediately got involved in tenant organizing in Tacoma Park. I served on the council there for 19 years. I authored major changes to the rent stabilization law that made it one of the most progressive in the country. I actually, we strengthened the right of first refusal law, and I actually worked with tenant groups and did real tenant conversions from rental property to tenant-owned properties. So I've been doing this for a very long time. I was involved with folks in Georgian Manors on Georgia Avenue and in folks along Eastern Avenue who were fighting proposals basically to wipe their property off the map. So I've been involved for a while in this. So I just want to talk today about, what do we do? How do we, use, it says using public funds efficiently to maximize preservation and production of affordable housing. It's also using public policy efficiently, because money can do things that, can do some things, policy is required to do other things. Next slide. So I want to just give you a perspective, because the ULI report, or the UI report, talked about who was coming to Montgomery County and how many people would need affordable housing. That was followed up by another report. Both of them neglected this minor detail that there are 20,000 households earning 31,000 or less who don't have affordable housing today. So whatever assumptions people were making about what you needed to do for who is moving here, you have to look here already. The second slide comes from a study that was done for Park and Planning. And the interesting thing about this is it breaks down supply and demand equilibrium by different income groups. At the left side of that, that's almost 21,000 households who cannot find affordable housing in their price range, which is below 30% of AMI. That was 2014. It's no different today. Go to the third column, and that's the people who are between 50 and 80% of median income. And notice that there's a 21,000 unit surplus. There are more units affordable in that bracket than there are people who have incomes who need it. And yet they're occupied. They're occupied by that 20,000 in the first group who are spending, we know, 50 to 60% of their income on housing. That means they're spending about twice what they should be spending. They are the other occupants largely of that middle group of housing. They have been forced to move up to a place they can't afford because otherwise they wouldn't be able to live here. That's why they're spending as much as we do. The funny thing about the slide on the right side, I would ignore those numbers because these numbers were based on everybody should spend 30% of their income on housing. Nobody in their right mind spends 30% of the income on housing unless you have to. That is the top of what banks will loan. Many people spend less. So saying that there's a deficit here is like saying millionaires should spend $300,000 a year on housing, which they're not going to do. But the left side of the chart is where the problem is. Next slide. This is what's expected to change in Montgomery County between 2020 and 2040. And what you'll see, just you can go to the far right, is that between 2020 and 2040, people below 75% of AMI, $75,000, will comprise over 50% of the demand for new housing. All of those would require subsidy. The folks between 60 and 75,000 would be MPDU eligible, and the people below 60,000, good luck in Montgomery County because we don't do anything. We actually do almost as little as humanly possible, and we didn't do anything for years. So which is how you accumulate 20,000 people without access to affordable housing. So if you can't get vouchers and you couldn't get into HOC projects, you've pretty much been left to the market. But now you take this number, and which is 30,000, and then add the 21,000 who are already here who don't have affordable housing. That gives you an idea of the depth of the problem. And when we build housing, if I get 15% MPDUs, I'm getting 15 units out of every 100. So there is no way we're going to get 50% of the units we need out of the policies we have today. It's mathematically impossible, and it won't happen either. Next slide. The county's been able to maintain its existing dedicated affordable housing stock with investments and incentives, and it's supported over 1,000 units a year of dedicated affordable housing, which offsets loss of affordability to rising rents. But many of these are only temporarily protected. I was surprised. I kept listening to numbers from the previous housing department about how much we had preserved, and then I discovered that many of those preservations are 5-year preservations. They were done in lieu of exercising the right of first refusal. If a landlord agreed to maintain affordability for 5 years, the county could pass on exercising the right of first refusal. So we've got a lot of short-term preservation that is lumped into our preservation in general. So the situation is actually worse than you would know looking at our data. And the conundrum is that the need for affordable units is much greater than the need for market rate units. So the market rate units can't subsidize affordable units. We normally use the market rate units to get additional subsidy. And if you wanted increases in your density and market rate units, I would try to increase what I get from you in terms of affordable units. But typically those are MPDUs, and they fall in that bracket of $60,000 to $75,000 of income. None of those units address people at the bottom. Next slide. So how do we increase the supply of affordable housing, particularly for low-income residents? One thing that I don't have on here, but I want to mention, if we could find a way, for example, to house the 20,000 people who are living and paying twice what they can afford, those 20,000 who can't find affordable units at 30% of AMI, I would free up 20,000 units in that middle bracket. And those would be available to other people with more income. There would not be the competition between people with very low incomes and people with these middling incomes. So one part of looking at this is how do you solve for the problem at the bottom, which you're not going to get to by just getting 15% of current units. As part of the master plan, the land along Bushy Drive in Wheaton was rezoned, the intersection of Veers Mill Road and Randolph Road, more or less, and there are 196 units there. So one of the things that we've said we're going to do when we make deals is no more MPDU deals. We're requiring that that units have to be below 60% of AMI. So we've got 192 units below 60% of AMI because we asked. We had lots of bidders on this project. The county's going to put subsidy into this project, but we put out there what we wanted as requirements, and we got every proposal met our requirements for the levels of affordable housing. There are 93 and 4-bedroom units here. In Bethesda today, almost no units are bigger than 2-bedroom. We got 90 because we asked. Actually, we said we want to make a deal with you unless you gave them to us. And we've got 15% home ownership, which is a start. It's not enough, but it's a start. On Halpine Drive, another part of the rezoning, this developer got an amazing increase in density, and tenants were given the right to reapply. My experience with the right to reapply is good luck. I've worked with tenants on the east side of the county where renovations were done and they were told they could absolutely reapply, which they can do, except they don't meet the rent requirements. They've got checkered histories with credit, and so they wind up not being eligible to get the apartments. So we negotiated with the owners more units at 30 to 50% of AMI, and also basically a right of return, no net loss policy. These people not only could apply, but these people could return. And what the owner said they would do is they would move the tenants from one stick of these units. These are garden apartments. They'd move them into vacancies. When they replaced that stick with a new building, they'd move the tenants back into the new building and work through the project like that. So we're really happy that we're able to do that. And you're going to see a no net loss policy that builds on our experience in Alpine Village. And if you're going to preserve affordable housing, you cannot afford to continue to lose it. Next slide. You have to have very clear goals in what you're going to do with public funds, resources, and your policies. I vetoed Bill 2920. It wasted public dollars. It subsidized developers who were going to build $1 million housing who did not need subsidies, and by reducing their property taxes for 15 years. And of course, that affects our ability to build schools and transportation, and all to build market rate housing. And we're going to get the usual 15% affordable, no more than we ever would have gotten before. In some cases, building on the metro to get this benefit is no different than the people who are building across the street, not on the metro. And so there was no need to build these units to put tenants close to. We would have gotten 15% out of any project they built anyway. It was an amazing waste of resources. You have to watch what you do with rezonings. Every time you rezone property, when you upzone property, the land becomes more valuable. And we've again seen this in Bethesda and in White Flint, where once property, was C1 zone, you could build maybe 2 stories out of it, maybe 3. But when you're allowed to go up 20 stories and your density is massively increased, then the seller increases the price of the land. The price of the land makes building affordable units more difficult. And getting additional units out of that becomes even more difficult because the amount of money they sink into the land. And it pulls development away from other locations. Focusing it, around metros, for example, if that's where the bulk of the market rate units are going to go for the next 10 years, it takes those market rate units out of the other parts of the region where you could actually use market rate units in order to attract affordable housing there. Next slide. Talked about zoning density. We've gotten really soft about this. I mean, the truth is, if you buy a piece of property and it's got 15% MPDUs, the value of the land needs to reflect the fact that for 15% of the units, you're not going to get market rate values. We continue to have developers complain about how much they paid and what a burden it is to build MPDUs. If the price you're paying for the land exceeds the value of what you can get for the MPDU units, you probably ought not to buy it. It doesn't become the public's problem. This is your problem. And unfortunately, as so much in the world of economics, the people who own land and the people who develop, you can't ask them to do less. And you can't minimize the amount of money they can take in, but everybody else, it means more subsidies from the government and more problems for us in terms of meeting our needs. The county continues to fill gaps, and we're going to continue to fill gaps on development costs and operating costs. We are hoping, we've had some discussions already with the Biden administration, that there is a substantial increase in investment in affordable housing and that there's a substantial increase in the tax credit programs, because if we had higher tax credit programs, we could bring more money into these projects at a lower cost and bring the price of the projects down. We're looking at new construction techniques. The county's about to approve, if we haven't done it already, wooden construction going up to 12 stories. This is a big deal because it used to be a dead zone from 7 stories to about 11 stories, where it was too expensive to build in concrete and you weren't allowed to build in wood. With the new wood out there, they're going to be allowed to build taller buildings, should bring the price of buildings down for these moderately sized buildings. And so we're optimistic that might be one way to bring down costs. We've looked at modulars and we've looked at shipping containers. We are looking at everything we can look at to figure out a way to break the price barrier. Again, if you're a developer, frankly, and you're building a high rise and it's costing you $400 a square foot or more, getting an affordable unit out of that is stunningly difficult. I mean, you basically have to be given it away, which nobody really wants to do. We'd like to consider linkage fees, like is done in Virginia. Linkage fees or taxes on commercial development. The reason they're on commercial development is that it's their employees, the restaurant workers and the retail workers who make such lousy wages that they're at the bottom of the income spectrum. And there are other jurisdictions aside from Northern Virginia counties where this is used. And it's a way of making people who contribute to the problem help pay for a solution to the problem. And we have to address unaffordable condo fees so that affordable units actually affordable. Bethesda is now mastering the art of the new gated community. So what you do to make sure that your communities don't integrate is you pile in the amenities into your HOA fees if it's a condo, and you have your sauna, you got your party room, you got all these other things, and all of a sudden the tenant can afford, they have to give me the MPDU, but they're not required to give the tenants free access to the amenities. And so the amenities and the HOA fees bump it out of the affordability for tenants. And so you can make your places expensive enough that you can actually get around having to have people go there. You don't say no, it's just that nobody will qualify. So we're looking at ways to address that. I think basically we just ought to build it into the requirement that if you do this building, you have to guarantee the tenants don't pay the amenity fees for those things. Other common area fees, yeah, but the common area fees for the social amenities, not if it means they can't live there. That is not a healthy solution. Next slide. How do we distribute affordable housing throughout the county? It'd be a good idea not to get rid of it where it exists. That's probably one of the most important things we need to do in this county. Preserving affordable housing is one of the most effective strategies and the best and the lowest cost strategy compared to construction. It is better to try to retain affordable housing than it is to replace affordable housing. The county has about 18,000 units of dedicated housing and about 25,000 units of unrestricted market affordable housing. That means it's just affordable at the price it is on the market today, which is about $60,000 for two people. Park and Planning did a study. They're projecting a loss of up to 11,000 units in the next 10 years. So let's go back and do the math again. 21,000 deficit in units for people who are here now, 11,000 loss of units that exist, and the need to build units for 50% of the people coming here, 50% of the 40,000 households, and those units need to be subsidized, and I get 15% subsidy. Current tools, we're working with existing owners and prospective buyers to commit to long-term rent levels. We use loans to support acquisition and renovation. We've done some pilots to reduce taxes, and we've worked with the state to get project-based vouchers, so the vouchers stay. These are HUD vouchers, housing vouchers. The vouchers would stay with the units instead of staying with the people. And why I want that is if they stay with the person and the person moves to California, that voucher goes to California, and that's one less voucher that's available in Montgomery County. We're adding money to the budget for current affordable housing. We're looking to do more. That always competes with everything else in the budget, but that's the world I'm in. Next. This is the Park and Planning study. It talks about that was the affordable. Now this is the chart on the left is the scenarios for loss of existing rental units by 2030. That is a substantial loss of affordable units. There are no plans to deal with that. Don't get alarmed. Next. Preservation and production. You should not incentivize tearing down existing affordable housing. There are two large neighborhoods in Bethesda that have what looks like missing middle housing. When you look at pictures of missing middle housing, that was rezoned originally even against the objections of the planning board for higher density. And that'll result in a loss of normally what they would refer to as missing middle housing. We're going to look at no net loss for rezoning projects so we can guarantee at least that whatever is affordable becomes the baseline, and then whatever is additional gets added on top of that. If I let somebody tear something down and only require, say 15% affordable, I could actually have no net loss in affordable units, which just digs our hole deeper. We need to zone for family-sized units. Again, Bethesda, if to the question of how do you distribute affordable housing, the planning director once answered a question when I was on the council about what was being built in Bethesda, and what she said was 80% of the units were studios and one bedrooms. So good luck integrating Bethesda, and good luck integrating any place else in the county where there's no requirement for 3 and 4 bedroom units. You will get no families over there. It's just not going to happen. And so unless we do that, all this new housing is going to stay in the realm of primarily unaffordable 1 and 2 bedroom units. And we need to start requiring more family sizes in all the apartments we build. I think we should go for deeper. We should take more MPD requirements, increase the number beyond 15, and include units that go to deeper levels of affordability. Otherwise, they will continue to be left out. I'm a big believer in rent stabilization. It worked in Tacoma Park. It's worked in other jurisdictions that use it. There are ways to make it so that it's not onerous, and I would probably exempt new construction because that's so unaffordable that it's kind of pointless to put rent stabilization on a $4,000 apartment unit. And in the long term, we have to promote home ownership. I'm having talks with, I convene an affordable housing group every couple of weeks. I have been talking to them repeatedly about shifting from rental to ownership. If we do not move to ownership, we will continue to leave the minority community without capital. This is the same raw deal they got after World War II. White folks got ownership housing, minority folks got rental housing. We need to figure out how we break that cycle. And that group has actually formed a subgroup to work on ownership promotion. Next one. Or maybe there isn't.
I think that's your last slide, Mark.
Okay. I did that as fast as humanly possible.
Oh, that was great, Mark. Thank you very much. I think we only have a couple questions, but I think what we'll do is we'll save the questions for the end because I think some of this will be discussed by the other speakers. So why don't we move on to our next speaker, and then we'll come back to questions later. Okay, great. Okay, thanks very much. So our next speaker is Will Jawando. Will got his BA in sociology at Catholic University and completed his JD at Columbus School of Law. During the Obama administration, he served as associate director of the White House Office of Public Engagement and advisor to Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan. In 2014, he founded Our Voices Matter Maryland. In 2017, he spearheaded Summer Rise, a summer job shadowing program. Will was elected and sworn in as an at-large Montgomery County Council member in December 2018. So I'll turn it over to you, Will. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Good to be with everybody. It's a distinguished panel, so good to see all of you. Very important issue. We've talked about a lot, and I appreciated the slides from Mark. It's a good foundation, so I can go over some, not have to focus on some things as much. But I do want to say, being born and raised here, the cost of housing has played a dramatic role in my life, as it does everyone who lives here, right? I grew up in the Long Branch area of Silver Spring, and right around Quebec Terrace. And the reason we lived there is because we could afford to live there. But what that meant, and I might have a kid walk in on me here. I'm going to turn my screen, but you guys know I have 4 young children. So, hey, sweetie. What that meant was that you had to make choices about, as that chart showed, okay, do I spend 40, 50, 60% of my monthly income on my housing, or do I spend, or do I try to spend a little less and compromise on quality and or safety and or the school where I live. These are critical decisions that impact everything else that happens. What school you go to, does it have an after school program? Can your parent live near a job that pays a living wage? Is there transportation infrastructure nearby so you can get around quickly? Are you safe? Are you environmentally safe? Not just public safety, environmentally safe. Is there a chain link fence, construction site right next to you? And are you more likely to get asthma? So this is connected to everything. And while we're a great county, for too long, we have not done enough in this area. And I think a big part of it, and what I want to talk to today, is about a proposal I introduced late last year in December called More Housing for More People, which was really aimed at trying to get at this really logjam of, there's an argument out there, okay, we just need to build more housing. Everyone agrees we need more housing and it needs to be more affordable. The question is, what do we do? And you have a camp that says, well, if you just build more housing, let the market build more housing, that'll solve every problem. And the prices will filter down and people who need affordable housing will get it. And that's just not true. It's true to a limited extent at the top end of the market. So people who are building 100% market through about 80% of AMI, there will be some filtering. And I experienced that too later in life. We lived in poorly maintained apartments in Long Branch, but then later in life, because of the great scholarships, I got to Catholic University and went to law school and got jobs and married a woman who's much smarter than I. We were able to afford to live in downtown Silver Spring. And we experienced that filtering. Living in first I lived in the Claridge House apartments, which were older apartments, kind of on the outskirts of downtown Silver Spring, almost on the way to Chevy Chase. Then we lived in Georgian Towers. And then we lived in Lenox Park. And these were older buildings. And as other buildings were being built in downtown Silver Spring, those became marginally, still not affordable to someone at 50, 40, 30% of AMI, no way. But for someone at the 80 or 90%, there was a little bit of competition for some of those buildings. So yes, we need more housing. I agree with that. We need to build more housing, but we also need requirements on affordability. We also need to look at our MPDU laws. I think I agree with that. We also need stabilization, and for people who can't deal with large increases. I really call it anti-rent gouging, because everyone should have stability, like you do with a 30-year fixed mortgage, to know what you have to pay and have some range and be able to plan. So this More Housing for More People was that we need all those things. We need more housing, yes. We need more affordability. We also need more protection of current renters. So that's in the form. So I say we need production, we need preservation of existing affordable housing, and we need protection for current renters so that they know how much their rent's going to go up. And then we need to move towards home ownership and different types of home ownership as well. So I agree with that. So I'm going to bring up a little chart here to show you what these two bills will do. One's a ZTA, a Zoning Text Amendment 2007, which would allow for different types of housing. So part of the more housing is we don't just need new single family homes and high-rise apartments that are at the top end of market. We need different types that accommodate families that are smaller, accommodate young people who want to live near transit and live near urban cores. And we need different housing types, right? And so that's what Missing Middle's about. And that's what we did when I proposed the ZTA, not a foreign concept here. And I'm going to share my screen. I think I have the ability here. There we go. So this is the More Housing for More People chart. And it's these two proposals, the ZTA, which is about the missing middle, and the anti-rent gouging bill on the right, Bill 5220. And we were able to pull together a coalition of people who weren't always for either one of these concepts. We pulled together Sierra Club, the Renters Alliance, the Coalition for Smarter Growth, people who may like one side of this equation more than the other, to say we need both and, not either or. If we're going to solve the immense challenges that were shown in that planning study about how many people are paying more rent than they can afford, and how many folks don't have access to affordable housing, we're going to need to do a lot of things differently. And both of these, importantly, are based on transit, where prices are the highest, transit corridors, where prices are the highest, and also where the demand is highest. and where there are a lot of amenities, a lot of access to job opportunities, a lot of abilities to transportation infrastructure to get around, to restaurants and other things. And so both of these are tied to transit corridors. If you look at the left, basic concept, missing middle, you take a single family home. This would allow missing middle housing to be built in single family zones within half a mile and a mile of transit, slightly bigger within denser between half a mile and a little smaller within a mile. It would conform and form to the existing single family height houses. So it can't be taller than 35 feet. You have to have the same setback so that it would fit in with the neighborhood. And I'll show you a couple examples. And it would go to create these small apartments, these quads, these duplexes like I grew up in. Once we moved out of an apartment, we bought a duplex in Long Branch as well. And 900 square feet. Think about smaller places where many families were built, grown up and lived in for years. But it'll do it importantly near transit where it's expensive. If you ask a developer today in my neighborhood of Long Branch, where there's a lot of these duplexes, land is getting bought up in preparation for the Purple Line so that they can be flipped around and sold for much higher prices. If you look at the bottom left of the screen, this is the average home prices. This is a little outdated now. It's over 500,000 for the last several months, but the average home price for 2020, 478,000 in Montgomery County, consistently gone up. You see that over time. On the top right is the rent gouging bill. Also, you see the average rent. The green is all Montgomery County, and the purple is Purple Line corridor, and the red is the Red Line corridor. You see in 2019, well over $2,000 average in the red and Purple Line corridors, the most expensive places to live in the county. You also, as my kids scream, okay, I'm on a call, guys. I'm on a call. Thank you. As you see on this bottom left, this is the rent burden residence. So rent burden is defined as you pay more than 30% or more of your income on your living situation, on your rent. You see the red line at the bottom here, and I'll make it a little bigger. The red line is the red line, obviously the red line on the metro, and the purple line is where the Purple Line is supposed to be. You see the darker the blue, the more people per square mile that are rent burdened. And you see it lines up pretty well about where those folks are. Give you just a quick example of missing middle. This is an example of a quad, a 4-unit that is all built together, a missing middle type. This one is not in Montgomery County, it's from somewhere else, but I'm gonna show you a Montgomery County example. This is currently in Montgomery County, a duplex, a 2-unit, which looks like in a neighborhood with single family homes fitting in. And obviously it'd be half the cost of whatever the single family home would cost. So design guidelines are important here. The reason we did a form-based approach is that you are respectful of the neighborhood, but also you force the units to be a little smaller, and also which should produce some moderate affordability. There's other things we need to do for affordability. This isn't going to fix it, but it's part of the supply side answer. And then the last one I'll show you is another one. This is in downtown Silver Spring. If you look at this park garage here, this is I think this is either a duplex or a tri. I think it's duplex. Again, same size as single family home and looks pretty normal. So the benefits of this are, as you saw on that slide, and I'll just bring that up for one more second, is the things in the middle here. So of both these proposals, reduce push out from gentrification, more affordable housing near transit, fewer cars on the road, more accessibility to transit, and access to jobs, which are all, as I said at the beginning, all of this housing discussion is linked to every part of someone's life. It's a core human right, a basic necessity. And I think we have to get past this. We're just going to do it one way. We're just going to build housing. That's what's frustrated me as a member of the housing committee for the last 3 years. We're just going to build more and give away more tax breaks and not require anything in return, and we're not going to protect people as well. And I think we have to do both and so I've proposed these as a starting point, not perfect. I know the planning board is and my colleagues were interested in the missing middle, but I've said we have to tie these conversations together. I'm not just going to allow for this type of missing middle flexibility in single family homes unless we also protect people in neighborhoods near transit as well through the anti-rent gouging. I think we need both of those, in addition to many other things, preserving, looking at the MPDU law, and also looking at what is an acceptable rate of return. You know, I brought up that profit is fine. We live in a capitalist society, I understand that. But when we're giving you tax abatements, we should be able to ask, what's a reasonable rate of return? I voted against the WMATA bill that Mark talked about. He vetoed. It was passed over objection where we subsidized the highest, most expensive type of housing with a 15-year tax rate at 100% with no increased affordability. I was able to work one amendment in where we incentivized some additional 3 bedrooms, but it's really important with government resources, with county dollars, that we leverage them to the max. And if it can't be sustained without that level of investment, or if we can't ask what your rate of return is, then we shouldn't be making that investment. You have some projects where you're making 8, 9, 10% return, which is reasonable, but others where you're making 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20%. And we don't know, but they'll always say we want a full subsidy. And if we're putting in a 15-year tax abatement at 100%, we should know that citizens of Montgomery County are parties to that financial transaction, and they deserve to know. And that's just one example, but I think we have to strike much better bargains in what we do and looking at these affordability and what we're getting back for what we give away. I'm not against pilots, I'm not against incentives, but we have to make sure it's a good deal for taxpayers, and that we're not going to solve this problem if we just go ticky-tack, and we're not going to supply side our way out of the problem either. We've tried the trickle down for years. It doesn't work. We're going to need multiple solutions. So that's my proposals. We'll be talking about it later this year and look forward to your questions. Thank you, Scott.
Okay. Thanks very much, Will. I really appreciate it. So our next speaker is Natalie Fani Gonzalez, and she was appointed in 2014 as the vice chair of the Montgomery County Planning Board and serves as a commissioner for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. It's the first Latinx and first millennial to serve as a commissioner at the NCPPC. She previously worked in a policy and communications unit for CASA and then for SEIU 32BJ before creating a public engagement forum. She lives in Wheaton with her husband and children. So Natalie, I'll turn it over to you then.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure to be here and to see so many people that I have been working with for so long. Again, my name is Natalie Fani Gonzalez, and I'm with the Montgomery County Planning Board. I became vice chair in 2018. Just wanted to say that, not in 2014. I'm gonna start by saying I gave Scott a whole bunch of slides. We're not gonna use them. Why? Because I think County Executive Mark Elrich did a great job using parking planning data and explaining it. So I don't need to go over that again. So I just think that reflects on the caliber that we have in planning staff. I mean, these guys are so dedicated, and I think the county should feel blessed of having them here. They don't just work there, they're really passionate about what they do. So I'm not gonna use the slides. So thank you, County Executive, for that. I do wanna emphasize 3 things. And if you can please put the first slide that you just had and you removed it, just that one. And that's Dewey Park, my background, in case everybody is wondering, is in Kensington. I wanna talk about 3 things. Number 1, I wanna talk about Thrive Montgomery. It's the general plan that we just approved on the planning board on Thursday, and is now going to the county council. The reason why I wanna speak about Thrive is because among the many sections that we have about the vision of Montgomery County, where do we see ourselves in the next 30 years? I worked closely with the staff on the affordable housing section. So I actually have here the plan. And if you go to page 95, and I hope everybody could read it before they testify in the public hearing in front of the council, they'll see many of the recommendations that we came across. One of them, and it answers many of the issues that both County Executive Mark Elrich and even Council Member Will Jawando have said, and I think they're right. You know, we need to expand opportunities to increase residential density, especially along major corridors and in locations where additional housing can assist in the development of complete communities. And also increase the number of income-restricted affordable housing units, especially for low-income households. I'm gonna emphasize that one because it's okay to build more density, and we need more density across the county, but we also need to make sure that we're conscious and we're determined to create housing for people who make less than $50,000 or $30,000 a year. Okay, that's the target for me. I was doing a series of interviews in Wheaton a few months ago, and I was just randomly talking to people who were like walking to the metro about their housing experience. You'll be shocked. Like many of them told me that they will spend 70% of their monthly check on housing. 70%, okay? I had people talking to me, people, you know, in their 30s, telling me that they had to live with 2 or 3 other families in order to live in the neighborhood. Why? Because they want to stay in Wheaton, they want to stay in Silver Spring, because they want to live closer to their jobs. So right now in Montgomery County, we have people living in 2, 3 houses because they cannot afford to live, you know, on their own. It just shows you the crisis that we're living in. And as both Councilmember Jawando and County Executive Mark Elrich have addressed, this has been going on for years. I feel that we're in the tipping point right now. So, so this draft that you're seeing on Thrive, I think it's a reflection of all the comments that we have received in the last 3 years. Even during the public hearing that we had on the planning board, we had over 80 people testifying, and everybody emphasized housing and jobs, making sure that we're attracting jobs to Montgomery County that actually pay a living wage. And that's key. Okay, so to me, you know, you gotta make sure that the Montgomery County doesn't fall into a bedroom community that is just housing. We want to make sure that we also have the jobs that we need, and we're training our workforce for it. The second thing that I want to mention, it's something that Councilmember Jawando expressed, and it has to do with ZTAs coming in to the council and the planning board regarding strategies to produce more attainable housing. So right now, the planning board is looking at different strategies, including the ZTA from Councilmember Jawando, another one that I don't think it has been introduced, but it's from Councilmember Hans Riemer, and many other people who have their own ideas. We're basically creating a report, and hopefully will be done by June, making sure that we're using everything that we learned in Thrive, plus all the other research that we're doing and these ideas that are coming in, to really create a strategy to focus on, you know, not just increasing density, but also preserving. One of the big things that we have in Thrive Montgomery, and you'll see in the document, especially on page 101, is the need that we must preserve housing, okay? So there's no one single solution. You know, it has to be a box of different tools to make sure that we can move forward on the housing crisis in the county. So preservation is key. Creating more housing that is attainable by people from different income levels is also key. The MPDU program is great, but it's, you know, not everybody qualifies. You know, people who are undocumented don't qualify, for example, but these are people who live in this county, who are residents, and who are making this county great. So it's thinking about them too. So the other thing that I would like to mention is that we're also working on the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Master Plan. That's a long title right there. I just call it Downtown Silver Spring. So it's basically looking at Silver Spring and seeing, you know, what can we do to make sure that, you know, this neighborhood, which is great, can be even better, right? So creating more housing is key, but also focusing on job growth in downtown Silver Spring. When you talk about housing, you cannot just talk about housing. You got to talk about jobs. You got to talk about public health. all those things are combined, and making sure that we have a strategy that fits in all those different boxes, is paramount. The beautiful thing about Montgomery County is that we have passionate people from every single sector, and we must work with developers. We must work with, grassroots organizations. We must work with, the homeless coalition. We must work with everybody to achieve a real solution that move us forward. So I'm gonna leave it like that because I know it's already 4, and we have Mayor Stewart and my special delegate who also need to speak, and I'm very mindful on their time as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Natalie. Appreciate it. It's great. Our next speaker is Vaughn Stewart. Delegate Vaughn Stewart represents District 19 in the General Assembly, and he serves on the House Environment and Transportation Committee and has been a leader in Annapolis on legislation relating to land use, tenant protections, and affordable housing. He lives in Durwood with his wife, Alex, and his 2-year-old son, and he's also on the board of the Renters Alliance. So Vaughn, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. It is awesome to be with everyone this afternoon, and I'm really grateful for everyone's time and to give up this beautiful day that we have today just to hear a lot of nerdy elected and appointed officials talk about housing. But I'm honored, especially to be on this rock star panel of some of my favorite people in the county. So it's cool to be here, and yeah, I'm excited to delve into it. So, as everyone I think on this call knows, Montgomery County and really the entire state has faced a housing affordability and a housing scarcity crisis long before anyone had ever heard of COVID-19. Nearly a quarter of Marylanders, so in the whole state, were housing insecure before the crisis. And of course, that crisis has been felt arguably most deeply in Montgomery County. And the pandemic has only exacerbated these pre-existing issues. The rents are rising faster than incomes, as has been mentioned. Housing costs are consuming a rising share of household budgets. And so since I was elected to the General Assembly in 2018, I've really been trying to push my colleagues in Annapolis to pursue policies that are as big and as bold as the problems that we're facing, especially here in Montgomery County. So I agree with a lot of what the first 3 speakers said. I don't want to go on very long, given our time constraints. I kind of just want to give a few of my views and then a brief legislative update. But I really resonate with, or I think Councilmember Joando's remarks about a both and strategy really resonate with me. I tend to call it an all the above strategy, but kind of my view on this stuff is that the housing crisis is so deep and so acute that we really need to throw the kitchen sink at it. And so first, my view is that the private market alone can't meet the needs of residents. And so we desperately need to expand the amount of non-private options we have, whether that's community land trusts or co-ops, or my favorite option is social housing, which is mixed income public housing. Vienna has long shown the world how to implement a successful social housing strategy. I know that the council is interested in pursuing this. I know HOC has been doing a lot already that is sort of social housing-ish. And for 3 straight years, I've introduced social housing legislation in Annapolis that would basically make a bunch more money available to counties to pursue this strategy, which would be basically be mixed income, publicly affordable, publicly owned, deeply affordable homes built sustainably, ideally near transit with union labor. And we made a lot of progress on the legislation. We've made national headlines. We've inspired other states to kind of take up this banner, but we have not quite gotten across the finish line yet. I'm hopeful that maybe next session will be the time that we do so. Maryland, it should be said, on a statewide level, spends an embarrassingly low amount on affordable housing in general. We've spent, from our Affordable Housing Trust Fund statewide, we've spent about $50 million since 1992. I turned 4 in 1992. So since I was 4 years old, we've spent a total of $50 million from the state. That means a jurisdiction like DC, albeit federal, on its local level, they spend more than that annually. And that's a jurisdiction that's like a 10th the size of Maryland. So it's, Maryland is on a state level has just been woefully absent, I think, from this entire discussion. Secondly, I'm cognizant of the fact that throughout the history of this country, zoning policy has been weaponized to block people of color and working class people from high opportunity neighborhoods. pushing them to the crumbling margins of cities and towns. And my view is that we should, much like Councilmember Joando said with Missy Middle housing, I think we should act boldly to reverse these decades of exclusionary policies by legalizing these modest home choices like duplex and triplexes in areas that are close to affluent schools, reliable transit, good jobs. And I know that Councilmember Joando is doing a lot of that same stuff at the county level, and I've pursued policies like that on the state level as well. And I'm happy to see that the county's making progress towards, essentially desegregation. And then third, I'm also highly aware that despite our progressive reputation, Maryland is in the bottom tier of states when it comes to protections for renters. And so even if we have all the new housing supply in the world, be it public or private or whatever, it won't do much if we can't protect tenants from eviction, from abuse, from rent gouging, and from health risks. And I actually got my start in kind of the Montgomery County political arena when I was working with the county executive, then County Councilmember Elrich, and the Renters Alliance. And I tried to start a tenants association in my apartment building in downtown Silver Spring. And we had the night of the event, we had Mark there. He was scheduled to speak. Then Senator Jamie Raskin was there, and the landlord called the cops on us. And since then, fortunately, what was it, Mark? NC 15 dash, I forget the number. I'm not as 15 dash whatever. Anyway, there was basically a landmark county bill that Mark pushed. I mean, the aftermath that mandated in the county that landlords had to allow community rooms to be used for the purpose of tenants associations. And since then, I've actually championed statewide legislation that's modeled after a lot of stuff the county has already done, called the Tenant Protection Act, but I'll get to that in a moment. And so, while I think probably not everyone on this panel and not everyone listening in agrees with my entire kind of panoply of views, one thing I believe most strongly in is that it's so crucial for us to build a broad coalition of stakeholders, I think, who are often, trapped in silos, whether they're in kind of the smart growth community or the tenant, people fighting for tenant rights, or, my comrades in the Democratic Socialists of America who are really passionate about social housing. I think that it's really important that we unite around a shared vision of housing justice. And I think Councilmember Joando spoke eloquently about this issue too, because even though there are disagreements, I think a lot of folks agree that we need to produce and preserve more affordable housing. I think that a lot of folks agree we need to empower tenants to fight against homelessness and displacement and segregation. I think a lot of folks agree that housing policy is climate policy, and that we can combat climate change by making it easier for people to live near where they work and near public transportation. And so I think we need to have an all of the above strategy, but I think more importantly, we need to make sure that we're all fighting collectively, because there are certainly a lot of folks in Annapolis especially who don't agree with any of this stuff, and it's hard sometimes to overcome their opposition. So now, just briefly, I want to pivot into a bit of a legislative update. I hate PowerPoints, which is why the only reason I don't have slides. I'm just terrible at them. So that's why I don't have slides, but I'm going to list all the HB numbers. If you have any follow-up questions about any of this stuff, I'm going to try to go really fast through it about the status of a lot of housing bills. This has been by far the most active year on housing policy the General Assembly has ever had. We've done more on housing so far this legislative session than we have done probably in the previous 50 years combined. It has been, the pandemic has sparked a lot of really good stuff. And so I want to just run through it quickly. The bad news is that sine die, the last day of the legislative session, is tomorrow. So if I have like bags under my eyes, or if I look like I'm running on fumes, I am, because we have been working around the clock, especially this last week, to get everything done. I don't have a crystal ball, so some of this stuff, I don't know whether it's going to be left on the cutting room floor or whether it's going to have a sine die miracle tomorrow. But the good news is there's still one day left, and so you still have an opportunity to weigh in and email your legislators if any of this stuff sparks your fervor. So first, many of your representatives, or many of you are represented by the District 20 team. So HB 1312, which was sponsored by Delegate Wilkins and Senator Smith, both of whom have been championed on housing issues, and who I've enjoyed working with both of them really closely on this stuff. HB 1312, which passed the House party line, and it recently cleared the Senate committee, which is the committee that Senator Smith is the chair of in the Senate. It codifies the existing eviction moratorium for all catastrophic health emergencies, even those hopefully won't have another one, but those in the future. And then it also says that there can be no rent increases or late fees charged during any catastrophic health emergency, this one or future ones. So we're waiting on that one to hopefully pass the Senate tomorrow. HB 104 and SB 401, which is kind of some cool kind of like, like a palindrome. That's a bill that one of my bills with Senator Joe Carter from Baltimore City, and it's pretty modest. All it does is basically say it came in as a 3-month notice provision before prohibiting landlords from declining to renew a lease without giving 3 months notice in advance. Unfortunately, the Senate amended it to be a 2-month notice, which, as many of you may know, Montgomery County already has. So that bill has already passed, and it's going to probably fully pass on both sides tomorrow and get all tied up in a bow. That will basically make Montgomery County's notice policy around lease non-renewal statewide, which is a small step forward, but I'll take it. HB 31, which is a bill from Delegate Luke Clippinger from Baltimore City, increases the filing fee for eviction proceedings, and then it allots that money to a right to counsel program. That bill is still sitting in the Senate committee. HB 18, which is from Delegate Juanita Fisher from Prince George's County, Senator Shelley Heddleman from Baltimore County, creates the first statewide right to counsel program in the country. And it has passed both the House and the Senate now on a party line vote. So that is a big, big headliner. Maryland will be the first state to have a right to counsel program for those facing eviction. They can get funding to have an attorney. HB 52, which is Delegate Melissa Wells, Senator Charles Sidnor, it basically extends the whole process. It requires landlords to provide notice before they do pursue an eviction proceeding, and it basically provides a lot more sort of like length to the entire process. It passed the House, but it's still sitting in the Senate committee. And then finally, other than the social housing bill, which I already mentioned of my own, I also have a bill that I alluded to before called HB 50, which is the Tenant Protection Act. It's basically an omnibus renters' rights bill that does a bunch of stuff, including a lot of stuff Montgomery County has already done, as I mentioned, including on the tenants association piece. It also provides more transparency around utility billing, like Montgomery County has done, thanks to County Executive Elrich. And it also makes it easier for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking to break their leases early and to escape a dangerous situation. Right now, survivors of that trauma have to they have to go to a court. They have to basically get a peace order to prove that they were a victim and they can break their lease early. This would allow a certified third-party professional like a social worker or a therapist to attest to their survivor status. And that sadly is still sitting in the Senate committee. I'm hoping for a miracle on that one tomorrow. So I think I probably went a little bit over my time. I apologize, but again, it is an honor and a privilege to be with everyone this afternoon. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Vaughn. That was great. And I think what we'll do is we'll move on to the last two speakers, and then we'll start with questions. I know there's a number of questions and a lot of discussion going on in the chat, which is great. But we'll make it a public discussion on screen at some point soon, quickly. So our next speaker is Will Roberts. Will's the Managing Director of Democracy and Government Reform at American Progress. Before joining, I got the wrong bio. So is an attorney and community leader serving in various capacities in Montgomery County, including as chair of the board of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance, chair of the Up County Citizens Advisory Board, and as a member of the Manna Food Center Advocacy Task Force. Will's currently acting vice president for democracy and government reform at the Center for American Progress, and was formerly legislative director and chief counsel for Congressman Jamie Raskin. He lives with his wife and daughter in Clarksburg. Thanks. Go ahead, Will. Oh, you're muted.
Hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. Sorry, my mute button is a little sticky. I don't know how that works when it's virtual, but that's been happening to me. Thanks for having me. And who doesn't travel with two bios, right? So, as our previous panel has said, so much great information has been put out there, and I know there's a lot of, as you said, great conversation going back and forth in the chat. Scott, I've been trying to track some of it as well. Definitely want to get that into the public discussion. So I'll be brief. For real. First, I want to just say a word about the Renters Alliance for those of us, or for those of you who don't know us. The Renters Alliance is the first and only regional nonprofit dedicated exclusively to providing renter outreach, advocacy, and education. And we're an alliance really of more than 30 nonprofit, labor, religious, civic, community organizations and tenants associations, and thousands of renters as well. We're also one of the leading co-founders of Renters United Maryland, which is a statewide coalition fighting on these issues and doing a lot of work that Delegate Stewart, my fellow board member from the Renters Alliance, covered so well. So I won't go into that. But if you want more information about the Renters Alliance, you can find us at rentersalliance.org. I like that a couple of people had started with sort of their housing journey in the county, and I'll just be brief and say that when I was in, I think my first sort of residence in Montgomery County was at the Blairs, at Blair House, actually, when I was in law school for my second and third year. And my wife at the time, or my girlfriend, who's not my wife at the time, was living in the Georgian, and we were sort of, as young couples do, splitting time at either place. She was paying an exorbitant amount for a studio. I was paying a decent amount for a 3-bedroom that I was splitting with some law school classmates. And as we started to look around the county for where we wanted to live, somewhere, you know, moderate for someone who was in their last year of grad school and who had just finished law school, we, you know, sort of looked out into downtown Silver Spring, had to keep looking because we couldn't afford, looked out a little bit until we got beyond Rockville and found a really affordable and nice place in Gaithersburg, where we loved the community, both the rich diversity, ethnically and otherwise, but also loved the price. And so, like most people and many millennials moving to the county, we moved based on what we could afford. And we're homeowners now, and we're able to save up and do that stuff to get into an affordable home. But I think about, you know, sort of our journey, which is, you know, we were lucky in that we had means to be able to not be forced into decisions necessarily about where we ended up living. And, you know, as we're talking about the rental, the population of renters in the county today, you know, almost 40% of our residents are renters in the county. And so when we're talking about what affordability means and how you get there, how you stay there, we have to remember that even as it is so critically important that we're trying to move people from if they're interested and if they have means from, you know, affordable rental housing to affordable home ownership, there's still going to be tons of people for various reasons that are going to be renters. And so, you know, our work and our view on this conversation, no surprise, goes to how we can provide protection and stability and support for those renters. But let me just say a couple of things off top to associate myself with the comments of some of the folks have made. You know, you can sign me up for the both and plus caucus in the sense that, you know, and as I share with people all the time, in Montgomery County, we're really good, and whether we're talking about housing or other issues, we're really good at being in our corners and saying, I'm for this, I hate that, I'm never going to have a conversation with you about that. And that's not how policy works. That's just not how things get done. We're going to have a conversation to figure out what the proper mix is here to, you know, to hit those 3 points, Scott, as you laid out for us succinctly. How do we increase the supply, distribute throughout the county, and preserve? You know, that's a mix. It's not all, you know, as Vaughn and other folks have said, and Will has, you know, has said, it's not all relying on the market to do its thing, because the market has not done its thing in terms of providing the pace at which we need to backfill our holes. So it's got to be a mix of preservation, of new construction, and figuring out how to do that in a way that prevents displacement. Certainly, as you've heard, you know, the work that the Renters Alliance has done with Councilmember Jawando and his bills pending before the council, which we support. You know, in general, as folks here all agree, you know, we've got to find the best way also to like tap the economic gains, right, from rising real estate values, and expand that and figure out how to, you know, spread that to the affordable rental and ownership market and provide those opportunities for low and moderate income families. But not only as you were mentioning, talking to folks on the street in Wheaton paying 70% of their check to their housing costs, this affordability crisis certainly has been hastened by the pandemic, but it's something we were in long before, right? And so even beyond the folks that we're talking about at a certain level of AMI, this affordability creep is rising up the economic ladder. And so it's just a huge issue that we're going to have to think really creatively about and be willing to sort of have some open minds about, about how we can get there. But of course, I think in the mix, missing middle housing and looking at zoning changes and upzoning, to provide. I did not grow up in Montgomery County. I grew up in Philadelphia, actually, in a row house. But my father, one of the ways that he made money, besides being a barber, he was a landlord. Actually, he owned a triplex in North Philly, and it was in a neighborhood. Certainly, it was on a block where there were other triplexes, but it was a neighborhood where there were other single family homes that, as Councilmember Gerlando laid out, looked just like you couldn't tell the difference unless you were standing at the door. And so we really need all kinds of housing types for all kinds of people who will need to live there and to continue living in our county. But in this conversation, we have to remember also that we're on the clock, frankly. Like I think there are upwards of 200,000 or so evictions predicted to be coming down the line in the state at some point. 20 to 30,000 of those could be here in our county, where folks are projecting. And so for anybody who's known someone or who has themselves been evicted, it's a disaster. It's a disaster for your family. It's a disaster for the stability of communities. It's a disaster that ripples out. And so as we're thinking about the policies necessary at the table to promote affordability, we also have to remember that in many ways, especially in the rental market, we're on the clock with evictions. Let me just say also, I think that when we're talking about, and certainly some of the more technical conversations we've had are, about some projects and areas that are quote down county, but when we're talking about affordability that needs to be in the housing market in our county, it's got to be everywhere, right? A family like mine or yours needs to be able to have a full menu of options as they're looking at where they want to locate in our county, to be able to move, whether it's closer to job centers or just closer to an area you would like to live in. So we want to, of course, have housing and affordability that is tied to transit and transit corridors. That makes incredible sense. But as we are thinking, up county, about not just the transit that we're trying to build up here, the transit to come, but also creating and locating job centers around the county. We want to make sure that we're looking at the importance of affordability everywhere. And just to note that in the renters alliance, I mean, we see a lot of people think, when they think of Montgomery County and they think of rental housing, you think of super dense areas in Bethesda and Silver Spring, but we work with lots of communities up in Montgomery Village, up in Germantown, and so folks are feeling the same pain and need the same relief from this conversation of what we're pouring in all over the county. And so because the previous speakers have done such a good job hitting all the technical points, I didn't have to go through most of what I was going to go through, but just to say that we're happy to be at the table for this conversation, because from our perspective, again, our view is through the prism of tenants and renters. Even as we are promoting affordable home ownership and want people to have the option to walk through that door, there are going to be folks who renting is their way of life for whichever reason. And so we've got to make sure that we have avenues that are sufficient for everyone. So I'll leave it there, Scott, because I definitely want to get to the conversation, and I want to hear from my buddy Mayor Stewart. So.
Okay, thanks very much, Will. I appreciate it. And our last speaker today is Kate Stewart. Kate is serving her third term as mayor of Tacoma Park. She sits on the board of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments and serves as vice chair. She's also on the steering committee of the Mayor's Innovation Project and is the immediate past co-chair for the Racial Equity and Leadership Council for the National League of Cities. And we particularly wanted to have Kate here because Tacoma Park has a long history of work in terms of protecting people, renters, and trying to preserve affordable housing. So she's going to give us an update about what they've been doing lately in particular. Kate, go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you to everybody on the panel. It's really an honor to be with all of you and all the work that everyone is doing on this issue. So the nice thing about going last is that I can sort of agree with much that has gone on before, and it's especially easy to agree with Delegate Stewart since we share the same last name. But I do want to thank everyone. So just to kind of start off, because looking at the people who are with us today, I know some people probably know Tacoma Park really well, and others may not know us as well. Our city is 2.4 square miles. We have about 18,000 people. We are a very diverse community, socially, economically, racially, and ethnically. Our residents
for dinner.
Our residents in Tacoma Park, we actually have about half renters, half homeowners, which is actually something that people don't always think about in Tacoma Park. But the problem is that we have a lot of racial disparities when it comes to home ownership, and I'll get to that in a moment. One of the reasons we are such a diverse community can be contributed to our emphasis on creating and preserving a range of affordable housing. And we have a long history of that, and County Executive Elridge talked about that and his part in that. The city of Tacoma Park is the only jurisdiction in the state of Maryland that has a comprehensive rent stabilization law that dates back to the 1980s. A couple of other just sort of quick facts. According to the latest data available, the median rent in Tacoma Park is 22% lower than the surrounding area and about 50% lower than in Montgomery County overall. I want to talk about rent stabilization for a little bit because first in Tacoma Park, we think of rent stabilization as a tool. In and of itself, it is not a goal. The goal is having stable and affordable rental housing. Nearly all of the city's rental housing stock is either rent stabilized or subsidized through another affordable housing program. And even with rent stabilization, as Mark and Vaughn and other people have talked about, there are a lot of people who can't afford housing, rental housing. Roughly a third of Tacoma Park households earn less than the minimum annual income required to afford a rent stabilized apartment. And we know this is probably much higher because of the impact of COVID-19. Because Tacoma Park is a pretty built out community already, there hasn't been much new construction, particularly of multifamily buildings since the 1970s. Lots of folks like to point to this and say that's why rent stabilization has prevented the building of new multifamily buildings, but I want to say that's not actually accurate. Although we haven't seen a lot of new multifamily buildings built, there has been significant public and private investment in the rehabilitation of existing affordable housing units. So since 2000, the county has invested over $18 million and the state over $20 million in affordable developments located in Tacoma Park. Over $20 million come in low-income housing tax credit funds, and over $23 million in private funds have been invested in affordable housing in the city. So while we may not have new buildings, people are investing both at the county, state, and private money into affordable housing. In addition, just two other facts on rent stabilization in Tacoma Park. We do have what's called fair return policies for landlords so that they can petition for a rent increase above an annual rent increase allowance. So if they have something, a major, like something they need to do their building or other reasons, they can come to the city and request an additional increase. In addition, for new buildings, for construction of new buildings, they have 5 years to set their rents before rent stabilization goes into place for the building. So people have a chance, landlords have a chance to figure out what the market rate may be for their building. We do need to find places to build more affordable apartments in our community, and we are doing that now. We have an opportunity to work with Washington Adventist University, who is going to be taking over the campus where Washington Adventist Hospital used to be. In addition, Tacoma Park has a recreation center on New Hampshire Avenue, and it's one of the places that we're looking to redo our recreation center and look for housing there as well. And what some folks may not know is that our rec center on New Hampshire Avenue is right near the Purple Line station that will be on University and New Hampshire. But I want to spend some time really focusing on home ownership and the need to look at that area. And we approach this on looking at home ownership in the city as the intersection between our racial equity work and our housing work. Because when we looked at the breakdown, the racial breakdown of home ownership in the city, we see huge disparities. About 70% of home ownership in the city are homes owned by white families, whereas 80% of our renters are Black and Brown residents. So rent stabilization is great in terms of helping us have affordable rents, and we have a diverse community, but what does it actually mean to forward our goal of being an inclusive, welcoming community? And that's when we need to address these disparities in home ownership. We know, and Scott laid out before, that family and legacy wealth is something overwhelmingly white families have had the opportunity to create in our country. And we've had a lot of barriers in place for that wealth to be created by Black and Brown families. And so how can we address these disparities? In Tacoma Park, we have a 4-pronged strategy. The first is having a good foundation in place. And again, we have the county executive for his time in Tacoma Park to thank for this, as he already talked about before. We have some very important laws and policies put in place, like tenant right to purchase. And we also created an affordable housing reserve fund in the last few years, because we know this work takes money. It takes money at all levels. And we knew a few years ago when I had proposed the Housing Reserve Fund that we want to work in partnership with the county and the state to do this work. And so the city put forward and has created its own Housing Reserve Fund. The third part about having a foundation in place is making sure you have programs to assist residents so that they can stay in their homes. And this is a place, I think it was Vaughn and Will talked about the intersection between housing policy and our work on climate change. And we've put in place sustainability grants so that people who may own older homes, may have lower incomes, can actually help increase the energy efficiency in their home through grants that the city provides. So having those pieces in place as a foundation is the first step. The second is we've really invested in down payment assistance programs in the city. This is also something the county and state does. Our city program is a bit different, is a grant program that we piloted a few years ago. And it's really to address these disparities in generational wealth. And we know that one of the barriers that keep people many times from moving from renting to home ownership is the cost of down payment and the closing costs. And so we've been able to provide these grants to renters so that they can be homeowners in our community. In addition, just helping people with the money isn't enough. We provide HUD certified first-time home buyers courses, because honestly, buying your first home, as many of us who are home buyers and can remember that experience, can be quite overwhelming. So we want to provide that assistance, as well as provide ongoing assistance. And so we've have staff who are there to help people throughout this whole process as they're doing it. The third part is building partnerships with different organizations, and particularly with nonprofit developers. And so one of the things we've been doing is working a great deal with Habitat for Humanity of Metro Maryland, and looking at shared equity models. And we have a couple of those projects coming online in the city now. And in this way, we keep housing that may be sold and then torn down, and might have been affordable at one time and now is $1 million home, by doing partnering with Habitat for Humanity using the funds that we have in our affordable housing reserve, we're able to create more affordable housing and keep it and preserve it. Another partner we have is the Housing Initiative Partnership, and we're very excited about this new partnership. HIP is an innovative green nonprofit housing developer and counseling agency. They're actually based in Prince George's, and we have their first project that's going to be in Montgomery County, starting in Tacoma Park. And their model is more of having an affordability covenant placed on a property. So again, there's all these different models. And I think as Vaughn said, it's an all of the above approach. We're not going to find a silver bullet to tackle these issues. And then the last, as I think many of us agree to, is the fact that we need more housing stock, and we need a variety of housing for people in our communities. So again, in Tacoma Park, we're building on a really strong legacy that we had in the community of believing strongly in affordable housing and trying to take that further right now. We're not saying there's one answer to this, but what we're really focusing on is what our goal is. And our goal is expanding affordable housing and home ownership opportunities and the preservation and creation of housing that is safe, sustainable, accessible, and affordable across socioeconomic groups. And I look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thanks very much, Kate. That was great. And those are all the presentations we have. There is a lot of discussion in the chat. And what we're going to do is to call on various people who have posed questions in the chat to put them on screen, and they can ask their question and the presenters can respond to it. So I think Mike might have queued up, but the first questions were from Jeff Mosley. Is he still here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Scott. Thank you. And thank you all for this great opportunity to focus on the affordable housing needs in Montgomery County. I actually come to this as one of the affordable housing practitioners working in Montgomery County. I represent Coalition Homes, an affiliate to Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless. So we actually focus on those who are struggling the most. And this conversation is timely because our speakers have eloquently brought up many of the factors that are facing the lowest income and even people at low and moderate incomes in this county. Overburdened, overpriced, there's not enough supply. And in the wake of the COVID crisis, we're facing an eviction tidal wave. And thank you to the folks at the Renters Alliance for the work that you do and but it really lays bare a lot of gaps, equity gaps for the people who just are trying to get onto the first rung. So in my day job, I'm trying to focus on providing quality, reliable housing for those at 30% area median income and below, and that's quite a hurdle. So in my questions, I raised that there is an ongoing and critical need for subsidy, looking for sources that can help supplement the HUD vouchers to really get people to be able to live affordably and meet their daily needs. But, and I really appreciate what Kate had to say, because part of what I see as the need is to help families get on a path that if they're able to rent affordably, they can at least lift their heads up a little bit to start to think about what their future is. So our partners from Renters Alliance, Habitat for Humanity, HIP, we all fall in line, but we need the resources to make sure that we can help a family understand how to save, understand how to save for home ownership, and address their family's issues and become lifelong Montgomery County residents. So it's a little less of a question, but I focus on sort of tackling day-to-day housing needs, and I look at how can my families, how can I get voucher subsidies for them so they can live affordably? Thanks. So that's directed to whomever wants to tackle that.
Can I say something very quickly? This is Natalie Fanny Gonzalez. Jeff, I love your question. And if you haven't seen Thrive,
I have.
please go to page 99. I personally included the third bullet. It says, as part of the commitment to the housing first approach, I don't think you can do anything unless you put housing as number one to end homelessness, to like make sure that people are empowered to really contribute to their community. So that's number one. So it's there. I hope you can testify in front of the county council to promote it. And also, I want you to please sign up for the attainable housing effort that we're doing in Montgomery County, because we're thinking about, you know, what you're saying right now and any other ideas, especially the ones that Mayor Kate Stewart raised, to make sure that we're doing the right thing. I think everybody agree here that we want to do the right thing, you know? It's just finding that the answers, there's no one answer. So anyway, I wanted to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, and Jeff, I just say, like, you know, what you said before about like the giving people the tools, and we've seen, especially like that first time home buyers course and things, like many times people may not end up actually purchasing a home in Tacoma Park. We have so many families who've done it then in other parts of the county as well. And it's really, it's giving people the tools, as well as starting to think about how do I move? How do I do this? Go from renting to home ownership, and then also providing them the support. You know, I just have to sing the praises of our housing department, especially Grace Wiggins. She is phenomenal. I don't know how she does all her stuff, but especially with the home stretch down payment assistance program, since she's been on board, how many people we've been able to assist. And each one of the people who've moved from renting to home to being a first-time home buyer, when I speak to them, they say it's because our staff has actually helped them go through the process and answer all their questions. And we have to look at that program too, because, you know, we're going to make some adjustments to it, because we are finding there are some people who can't access it because of income level, student debt, or other things that we really need to be expanding it. But I just wanted to emphasize that is definitely our experience in Tacoma Park.
So Jeff, you know, you and I talk every few weeks on this.
Yes.
So, you know, I've been pushing very hard to look at ownership, and I've asked the nonprofits, which they don't all jump up and down and say, yeah, I want to do this. But I've told them, I said, you need to think about buying units, buying a building for 5 years, working with the tenants to make a transition, help people get their credit straight, help people, you know, get whatever kind of, you know, upgrade their skills, they can get better jobs, train people about financial literacy so that those units can be transferred to the tenants. And the big thing about this is when tenants take out individual mortgages, groups like Jeff's become whole again, and they can reinvest in other properties. When my money gets sunk in a 20-year mortgage, my money's gone. When my money rolls to a transition where it comes back from new ownership by the tenants, I can keep my money multiplying, which is what I want to do. The other thing is we are buying in this budget an office building to start housing the homeless. I am tired. I have told people I'm fed up with Montgomery County's policy of you sleep outdoors 8 months a year. So we're buying a first office building. We're going to make sure that it, you know, it'd be suitable for homeless folks to come in. And then my goal is to buy 2 or 3 more buildings and try to convert them into rows, a single room occupancy, not school research officers.
I'll follow up with you on that, Mark.
So you know, I am a big believer that we've got to tackle this, and I don't need to wait on a plan for 30 years from now. This is something we need to do in the next couple of years, and I'm determined that's the path we're going to go down.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Thank you very much. Our next questioner is Mike English. And I know there's been a lot of discussion back and forth in the chat. So, Mike, why don't you talk about what your concerns are?
Yes, thank you. And yeah, my initial question was initially to the county executive. Obviously, that's been litigated somewhat in the chat already, so whoever wants to weigh in can. And first of all, totally agree with much of what the county executive said and what most speakers said. I believe in Mark supply as part of it. I by no means think, like Mr. Roberts, I'm going to steal that line of the yes and caucus. Like, we need everything, I think. Agreed that low-income housing is the most pressing priority. Agreed that market can't do it on its own. You know, agreed in housing first. I'm a big believer in Progress Place, which I'm like half a mile from, all these things. But I do feel that there is a part for market supply to, I mean, I do believe that supply and demand work, to everyone's point, not on their own and not sufficiently. that could help bring prices down. But I do think there is an issue. Will also spoke to the affordability problem creeping up the income ladder. And that is absolutely a thing. It's not only the very low income that are struggling. I know several friends who live in downtown Silver Spring that are looking at Frederick, or that are looking further out in the county or outside of the area altogether, because they cannot afford a place to live, even though they make decent salaries. So I guess my question is, before I get to that, I want to say a little bit of my journey and how I think it makes my point. I lived in Blair House actually for 8 years, 8 years, before I was able to buy a condo down the street about a year and a half ago. And you know, I can only do that because it was like I couldn't afford a house anywhere near here, ever really. And now I am not taking up a unit in a relatively affordable 50-year-old building that someone else can go through. So I guess my question is, what do the speakers think about that kitchen sink approach, about also needing more zoning reform, also needing more supply, market rate and otherwise?
Can I jump in? I love that question.
Yeah.
Scott, is that okay? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. I agree with you. Like, we need more housing, period. You know, this county is evolving. And if we really want to make sure that we're a county that's welcoming everybody, then we need to understand that more housing is needed. If you really believe that we need to fight climate change, then you need to be more housing near transit and also near like key corridors across the county. I didn't want to say this, but I'm just gonna say it at this point. You know, the bill, the ZTA that was mentioned by a couple of the speakers today, the one that creates density in on top of Metro, I agree with it. I mean, you have to. It's one of those things. Let's take, for example, Glenmont Metro Station. There's nothing going on there. Let's take, for example, Wheaton, where I live. There's nothing happening there. We need to attract developers. Developers are not the enemy. I need their money. I need their investment. I want them to come here and create more housing in my community because I can feel and see, you know, how people are struggling to find places to live, you know, near transit. It's not okay to say, well, you know, I cannot giving a break on taxes for 15 years. But honey, there's nothing going on there. You're not giving a break when there's nothing going on there. But, you know, it's okay to disagree. I think that's one of the issues that we're going to disagree here among the speakers, and that's okay. You know, it is what it is. But I mean, if you really believe in climate change, then you need to be conscious enough to say the housing is key. The housing, we need to create more of it near transit so people can start relying on cars and we can create more protected bike lanes.
So I'll do it.
Mark, don't get mad at me.
You know I'm going to read it.
You know, don't get mad at me.
Look, first of all, there is building going on in Wheaton. There's a new project going on at the intersection of University Boulevard and Naviers Mill Road. The problem is demand. And this is what nobody wants to deal with. The county got a thing called the REACH report, which was not done by me. It was done by the Economic Development Corporation. And what they said is Montgomery County's growth has been zip zero, no job growth for 10 years. No job growth means no housing growth. Housing demand, housing supply is short in the sense that people are in the wrong bracket, that there are low-income folks who can't find supply of housing that meets their bracket. But housing in Montgomery County is being built and continues to be built for the higher end brackets. And so we have a very dysfunctional housing market. Nothing for people at the low to middle, everything for people at the top. And whatever I get in the middle is the 15% MPDUs that I get. You will not get housing demand. I've heard this from the guys who own the Lerner properties in White Flint. You've heard it from Frit Realty, who said there is no demand for our housing at the price they want because we zoned everything for high rises. There is a project going up in White Flint. It's Brian Folger's project. Brian Folger decided not to build a high rise. He's building a building where the construction costs will let him rent the units. And it's not an affordable project by any stretch, but it's certainly a project he can get built. The other thing is people are acting like you need this zoning plan to get housing. What people don't realize, and you go to my county webpage. I was on the Transportation Planning Board with Council of Governments, and the projections for Montgomery County are based on Montgomery County's existing zoning. So when they do the estimates of growth in Montgomery County for 2030, 2040, and 2050, it's predicated on zoning decisions that we have already made. 80% of the housing is within a half mile of planned transit already. So we're being led by the nose down a road, and people are saying, you need to do this to get housing. You need to do this to get housing. Folks, we've already zoned for it. It's the same thing with commercial property. I have 10 million square feet of empty commercial property, 20 million square feet approved in a pipeline, and not being built because there's not a demand for commercial property. There are thousands of units, if not still tens of thousands of units in the housing pipeline that all somebody's got to do is go in and pull a permit. People have invented that Montgomery County is hostile and unfriendly. Not true. These are approved projects. So before people leap on this and think you need to rezone this or that to house people, we've actually rezoned the county under all these master plans to house people. The problem is housing is not being built. So we continue to play around about, we're just going to ignore the fact that we've got an underlying problem of a lack of jobs. And by the way, jobs don't only solve the market rate problem. It still doesn't get anybody building affordable housing for people at the lower brackets. But I'm more than happy to share with anybody, get you a copy of me at the planning board walking through, not the county planning board, the transportation COG planning group, walking through how these projections are made, because I am tired of people claiming that the county is not zoned for the housing that's coming here, when in fact, not only is it zoned for it, it's actually zoned largely in the right place, because the planning board did a pretty good job in most places making sure that that's where the housing was going to go. But this is a longer discussion. But I'm more worried about the lack of demand in this county. That is the problem. But even if I get demand, I'm going to get 15% MPDUs. Big deal. If I need 50% of my units at MPDU prices down to 30% of AMI, getting 15% is not ever going to solve this problem.
Oh man, I have so much to say,
Mhm.
but I don't want to get into back and forth. But I will say that is the planning department who does the COG analysis, and it's the planning department that puts forward, recommendations to solve this crisis. And actually, you cannot equate zoning with building. The WMATA sites, it wasn't about zoning. It was about building more density.
That's
And no, you cannot build more housing in our current zoning that is single family zones. It's right now, you cannot do it.
most of the housing is going on the metro
But I'm
station.
gonna drop it because I know we're gonna get into this back and forth that will not end. But I do want people to please watch the attainable housing effort and contribute and understand the data. I am not here, I'm like the last person that developers love, because I'm very tough with them too. But I also know that they are our partners, and I know this county has to evolve with zoning laws and building more housing for low-income people. That's why I put in the Thrive Montgomery draft that we need to emphasize in building housing for people who make $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year.
Okay.
I don't want to get huge, but if I can just briefly respond, I don't want to monopolize time, but my response to the county executive would be that no one is arguing that MPDUs themselves are going to do it. And if memory serves, about 4% of the county is zoned for anything more than single family zoning. So I mean, I'll leave my point there.
We only have a few minutes left, so why don't we move on? But we're gonna watch for Mark's testimony before the planning board when it comes up on Thrive Montgomery.
I get 3 minutes. It's like you can't even do stuff.
Right. Well,
this is guaranteed to prevent having a discussion.
You can talk to me anytime.
Okay. Well, you can submit written testimony too, I'm sure. We had a question from Helen about the impact of COVID and working from home on housing.
Hey, first I'd like to really thank both Mark and Kate Stewart for helping me out recently. I'm actually trying to purchase the condo I've been renting, well, looking at a few others, but you know, everything Kate said about the first time home buyer program, and Mark's been helping me out looking at some other places and looking at like state and county stuff. So big thank you to both of you, and some other people that I've been talking with. And that kind of segues into a probably less urgent and less entertaining question than this last debate, was like shifts in demand for mainly like middle income people due to COVID. Now, everyone who knows me knows I'm very much like, I want to get back to normal. I want social distancing to go away. I want this to be irrelevant. But when I was having a conversation with a realtor, she said that single family home buying is crazy. You know, you have people buying up places for all cash, way over asking prices. But condo buying isn't quite as crazy because people with the money are trying to get like a yard. They want outdoor space. They don't want all these kind of shared amenities. You know, like no one really likes working out at a gym with a mask on, or, you know. So I was curious if anyone who knows that part of the housing market, you know, the high rises with all the amenities, which I was always critical of because I thought, oh, you know, what income bracket are they going for? These are $2,500, $3,000 a month for a 1 or 2 bedroom, and it's all these fancy amenities. Like, who can afford that? And now I'm wondering, is the demand going to shift away from that? Like, do people want to live in high rises without any outdoor space and with all this emphasis on this like social communal spaces? Like, does that matter? Because demand is so crazy anyway. People just want anything. But it seems like people of that income bracket that could afford the fancy amenity type places are all trying to scramble in the single family housing market. Or maybe this isn't relevant. Maybe after COVID, everyone will want to like sweat in the gym together and that will be all fine. So if anyone could comment on the COVID and social distancing and the working from home, is that going to have a lasting impact on the demand?
So a lot of what we're seeing is more people working in the home permanently. CareFirst just announced they're going to keep the bulk of their workforce at home permanent. Montgomery County, we are seriously looking at split weeks, and we've told our managers, you are not bringing your people back. Well, our plan is to keep as many people mobile as possible. And I think that's gonna grow. So a good internet connection may be more important than, for example, a good transit connection. If you can get to the office, what you want is, a gigabyte per second on your internet rather than a walk or drive or a subway to a job. So that appears to be real. I've talked to some developers about looking at converting office buildings into housing, which would be the easiest way to do this. It would, keep them in the game. It would be less expensive to convert these into housing than it would be to tear them down and start over again. And demand in the offices is already really, really soft. When you've got we have 10 million square feet in vacancy before COVID started. And that, by the way, had been there for over 10 years. That's your office demand. 10 million square feet of vacancy, 20 million in a pipeline. It ain't happening. And so I think the world's going to change. I think there will be more people staying home, and I think we may use some of these offices as apartments, which is good news because it does get people closer to the cores without having to build. But
if people are working from home more, don't we need more 3-bedroom units, for example, because people need office space?
Well, I think you need, whether you're working from home or whether it's a suburban home or whether it's something in Bethesda, the refusal to build 3-bedroom units in Bethesda, to require that, just guaranteed the segregation of Bethesda. All of you who are worried about social justice issues, what do you think happens in Bethesda when all you can do is buy an expensive 1 or 2 bedroom apartment and no one was willing to require 3-bedroom units there? You're gonna get a segregated Bethesda, and then when people have families, guess what? They leave. So your whole fantasy of a livable, walkable community is only livable and walkable if you're single. So we've got problems. Most of what's being built Most of what's been zoned for in Bethesda, you can shake your head no, most of what's been zoned for is not going to produce family housing. And if you want to introduce a bill or planning change that would get you 3 and 4 bedroom units tomorrow, I'll support it in a heartbeat.
Can I just, sorry, Vaughn, you got
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're welcome to go.
well, I was just going to actually.
You're my slightly older cousin, so I'll defer.
Yeah, just slightly. Thanks. Yeah, I was just actually going to point to you, Vaughn, because I think one of the things, Helen, that you bring up that we're seeing that as an impact of COVID goes to the eviction issues. And one of the things with so many people at home right now, and that's why Delegate Wilkins' bill that didn't move forward on stable homes and some of the stuff that Vaughn is working on and others in Annapolis is so important to help people stay in their homes and not be evicted or not be able to renew their leases. Is one of the things that we're seeing is people complaining a lot more about noise and about children in apartments. And if you get labeled as one of those sort of like nuisance tenants and other things, that is a real problem. And we don't have enough protections right now for people who are renting. And so that's why I wanted to tee you up, Vaughn.
Well, thank you. Well, yeah, no, but the mayor is exactly right. I mean, I think the working from home trend, by all accounts, is going to continue in some capacity, not to the extent that we've seen over the last year, but I do think that it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle. And I think that the mayor is absolutely correct that if you have more people relying on their homes as their offices, it's even more disruptive for them to be displaced. Whether it's lease non-renewal or an eviction. And so she's absolutely right that we need to make sure people can stay in their home even more so. Now, I think economists disagree about whether the housing demand shifts that we've seen are gonna stabilize. Like I was interested in this at the beginning of session about some possible legislation, so I looked into it, and I think mostly it's just kind of like the shrug gif at this point from like folks. Like I'm not sure if people are totally sure whether or not that trend is going to sort of stay in the crisis or whether we'll sort of slowly get back to normal. But I will say that regardless of what the demand looks like, and this is not so much about like luxury amenity rich homes, but like no matter what the demand looks like going forward is, we're going to need more housing density. I mean, just period, right? Like, I mean, we only have, less than a decade to make, huge shifts in the amount and how we're doing our land use policies if we're going to avoid a climate catastrophe, right? And so like, to me, even if you take the housing equity issues aside, I'm someone generally who thinks that, there was a recent, I'll put it in the chat, there was actually a really recent report, I think from January on a statewide level, sort of sidestepping the county conversation that we've heard. But there was the state housing agency, DHCD, released a really interesting point called, a report called the Housing Needs Assessment that said that, statewide, we're gonna have a shortage of hundreds of thousands of homes. And so while I would love to see as much of that gap as possible filled with things like social housing, I think the private market is going to absolutely have a role to play if we're going to hit that number. I mean, that's just like really the only realistic thing you can say. And I also just think that, and this is not necessarily even about Montgomery County, but you look across the state and there are a lot of places near downtowns, near jobs, near really affluent school areas, near walkable communities or whatever that are zoned for single family only, which basically means they ban apartments. And as we heard from the mayor earlier, there is a disproportionate number of working class people and people of color who live in apartments. And so I honestly just think it's morally wrong for a place that's jobs rich, transit rich, to ban apartments. I just think that's wrong. But regardless of what the demand looks like, I don't have a crystal ball. I am certainly not a fancy economist. It's a great question. I'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But regardless of how the demand shifts, we need to build more housing near transit and we need to build more dense housing or else we're going to have a planet on fire.
Thank
Okay.
you. I know you got 2 minutes, so just thank you. Move on.
Yeah, it's almost 5 o'clock, so I wanted to throw it to Michael Tardif, who had a question also, and then we can wrap up. Michael.
Hi, sorry. I just have a brief question. There's a proposal to develop the Holy Cross Academy property on Strathmore Avenue. Nothing has been filed yet. The property address is 4910 Strathmore Avenue. My address is 4911 Strathmore Avenue. I'm chairing the neighborhood ad hoc committee on the project, and we are decidedly not taking a NIMBY approach. The property is a stone's throw from Grosvenor. The current concept plan is to cover 37 acres of what is now open space with townhouses that will be sold at market rate. Our preference would be for high rises with affordable housing that would leave far more open space and provide the appropriate type of housing within walking distance of Metro. What can we do to help make that happen?
I will tell you, you need to come to the planning board. As you said, it hasn't been introduced to the planning department, so I'm able to speak. Once an application is introduced, then I can talk to anybody about it. But I look forward to seeing it, and I look forward to seeing you giving your comments once the staff gives their recommendation. That's all I can say.
Michael, the only thing I'd say about wishing for high rise is you're driving up the price per square foot. I mean, the construction cost is radically different than if you're in gardens and in heights below 7 stories. I mean radically different. So
what approach would you suggest then, Mark? Because the townhouses at Symphony Park, which abut that property, they're 4,000 square feet each. They are occupied by 2.3 people each, and it's not a really efficient use of land and affordable housing. So if high rises aren't the solution, what is the best solution for this particular parcel?
If you're trying to keep the prices down, I'd be looking at a mid-rise, either garden or something a little bit taller than a garden. Again, Folger's project up on the Pike, I think you can get a look at it now. I think it's come out of the ground or is about to come out of the ground. But again, he passed on the high rise to keep the prices down. And so I would hate to be caught between a townhouse and a high rise as your options. I think mid-rise.
Okay.
I think garden apartments in the county make a lot of sense because it's a way to get units that are affordable rather than units that are unaffordable. But unfortunately, Park and Planning zoned massive areas, say White Flint 2, zoned all that for high rise instead of for gardens. So affordable housing depends a lot on the product you want to produce.
All right, thanks. We'll dig into it further.
And we zone it high rising because it's near the metro. And if you really believe in climate change, you need to make sure you have more density near the metro. So you gotta see the future too and make sure you protect the planet. That's why I supported it.
There is no metro in Rockledge. There is nothing in Rockledge.
Swarthmore. There's a metro station nearby. People can walk there.
From Rockledge?
And no, this particular property, Mark, is next to Grosvenor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know where you are, yes.
Well, it's 5 o'clock, so I just wanted to say thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to Mike Tardif. It's been a really great, interesting discussion. I'm glad we had a good turnout, and I appreciate everybody participating. We will send an email to everybody later with the link to the recording, and hopefully we can continue this discussion sometime in the future soon. And it's a lot to talk about. So thanks very much to everybody, and I appreciate all your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
A great conversation, folks. To be continued.
Thank you.